Okay, everyone, welcome to the Commission and the edTPA Program Update webinar. There are a number of us on this webinar co-leading it today, and we are asking that all participants stay muted. We've got a lot of information to give you. We will ask you to hold your questions, but put them in the chat line. So April 2nd, ready to talk about the edTPA and what we're thinking about due to the COVID. Next slide. This is a webinar that the Commission is co-sponsoring it along with Scale, and as Scale has partners both in AACTE and Pearson Evaluation Systems. You will hear from a number of us from these organizations today during this webinar. The next slide. Again, we're asking you to stay muted. In fact, we will be muting people routinely. And so Jake already reminded us, if we're supposed to speak, we need to make sure we're unmuted. And you as a participant, please think of your questions and send them in the chat line. At the end of the meeting, we save the chat and we actually look through it very carefully to understand what's going on, what people are asking, and to help plan for a future sessions. So please go ahead and put questions in that chat line as we go, because those will be the ones we're able to answer. I'm going to turn this over now to Amy and Nicole to do introductions and get us going forward.
Great, thank you, Terry. This is Amy Rising, Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I want to just start by introducing the Commission staff that will be working with you this afternoon to share this important information. So you just met and were introduced to and probably already knew Terry Clark, Director of Professional Services Division. I'm the Director of Performance Assessment. Wayne Baser is our consultant on performance assessment, and he actually got pulled for another emergency assignment today, but we will have Jake Schuler with us, who's consultant with Professional Services Division. And to you, Nicole.
Great. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see faces and names, those of you that have your cameras on. So I'm Nicole Marino. I'm the National Director for edTPA. I'm also joined by my colleague, Kendall Stansberry, who many of you know as our Senior Assessment Designer, Assessment and Rubric Designer. I'm also joined with two of our partners from Evaluation Systems, and Kelly Crawford and Lori Kroger, who are on the line and will speak to you as well. So thank you. And then next slide. And so just a slide for the agenda, we'll talk about some general resources for the COVID-19 pandemic, and then CTC will give some guidance around the clinical practice, and then we'll come back to edTPA for guidance and considerations regarding submissions and other technical handbook requirements. And then we'll also finish up with some additional considerations from the Commission regarding teacher performance assessment in general. So thank you. Next slide. Great. So these next few slides, you can go ahead and go to the next one, are some resources that are both put out by the Commission, also with Scale. So most of you have received the emails about the updates. So the Commission has the dedicated COVID-19 page, so check there for updates. The PSD, where this webinar was announced each Friday, and many of you, I forwarded that to a lot of your colleagues too. So if you're not signed up for that, please do sign up for that. Very helpful information. And then the memorandum as well that was released by the Commission on March 12th with some additional information. Terry or Amy, did you want to add anything to that? Terry, I think you're muted.
I would just add quickly that pay attention to that COVID-19 webpage. There was an e-news blast yesterday about the variable term waiver that we'll be talking about later in this session. There will be another e-news today with additional information about the variable term waiver. So that COVID-19 webpage will be where all that information lives.
Great, thanks. So the next slide, here are some other general resources. Again, you will receive a copy of this, which the links will be live for you. The Learning Policy Institute has put out a number of things. Our partner, ACTE, has also a dedicated page that has state policy updates from all of the states, and also some resources general to online learning and online teaching, things like that. And the next slide, please. And also I thought I'd share with you Connect Ed, who is very present in California. They are putting on a series of free webinars. The date for this one, I forgot to add in there, is April 7th. And I believe it's about 12:30 p.m. So they've had a few already. I put the link at the bottom to register, but they're actually seeking funding right now to do a repeat of these because they've been so popular. So just another resource. I know there's a lot of questions about just support for online learning. So, and next slide. And then Jake, I think this is on to you.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. So just to let you know, as you've seen already, the CTC is closely monitoring the situation with the coronavirus and the impact on schools and university closures, and especially on candidates and their abilities to complete their clinical practice hours and experiences, and also to complete performance assessment requirements. So there's already been some information shared about different flexibilities or different ways to complete hours in order to make sure that candidates can finish this year, or if they cannot, that there's an option for them to do so in the next year after. So continue to follow the resources we've talked about, and we'll continue to update you. So this next section is specific to the clinical practice and field experience work. So this first link here that as we were saying earlier, as Nicole was saying, it'll be active once we send you the link. This guidance document is from 2017 and 18 updates. This is not specific, this link here at the top is not going to be specific to things that have changed, but this document is a guidance document for all clinical practice placements for multiple and single, and there's a little bit of information about education specialists as well. But this has some language in there that already talks about ways that programs can have their candidates complete clinical practice in a way that fits the particularities of that program. So there should be a lot of language in here that will help as you think about ways for your program and your candidates to complete their hours. As you probably know, the special education standards, the newer standards will not be implemented until 2022. So at this point, the 2010 standards, those that are active now, they do not have a specific hour requirement. So there are standards within there that go through the competencies that need to be covered by those programs, and you should continue to follow that, not towards the new standard hours. But of course, we'll update that depending on how things roll out over the next few years. Hopefully, we'll be back operating in a more normal world, soon. Hopefully, definitely by next school year. So as these next two bullets say, programs are still required to meet the same standards and to ensure that candidates are completing experiences and demonstrating that they've had chances to be introduced, practiced, and assessed on performance expectations, and to work with partner school districts to make sure those are happening. So we'll get into now a little bit more about how those things are evolving in a bit as school looks very different now. So the thing to remember, the clinical practice should take place in an educational setting. And if the schools are not open, what are the options available? So during this time, they can take place through online learning instruction, remote instruction, or at alternate locations as part of the extended school year or school day. They could also include some virtual reality or simulation teaching options. We know there are a lot of programs that have those options, and those things should be used if needed, for a portion of these hours they're completing. This last bullet's very important. So there's going to be a lot of reliance on programs taking the guidance that the commission is providing and then implementing these things in a way that your program knows fits the best circumstance for your candidates. And please keep note of those and think about how you would explain to the commission, perhaps in a site visit year, in a program review year that might be coming up for you. Think about how you would include a paragraph explaining to us how you made alterations to the clinical practice experiences in this situation in order to make sure that they could have a chance to be introduced and to practice the performance expectations and get the best experience that they could. So we know it's going to look a little different for each program. So what should always be happening for these practices is that they're under the supervision of an experienced educator, either the program supervisor, district employed supervisor, or others, depending on what their setup was before this happened as well. They should be planning instruction, delivering instruction, reflecting, analyzing student work, and a lot of this language is also mirrored in that guidance document from 2017-18 on the earlier slide. When you go into that, you'll see a lot of that same language of talking about different ways candidates can have these hours. It's not just purely hours of instructing students or working in a classroom. It's also working with, planning, reflecting on those experiences. And a note down here for other credentials, those candidates will be practicing the knowledge and skills according to their standards and under the supervision, again, of experienced educators. For the solo teaching portion for multiple and single subject programs, the standards require a minimum of 4 weeks of solo teaching or the equivalent. So an important thing here is it does not need to be sequential days. We know this is going to look a little different if candidates are still working on these weeks and these days of solo teaching over the end of the school year. So it's important to use the guidance to try to make sure that they have this solo teaching and to communicate with us and keep a record of how that worked for your program and your candidates. Terry, is there anything you wanted to add to these last few slides I've gone through?
No, I think you've made some really good points. One of the reasons Jake is the person here talking with you about this is when you send an email into the TPA email we're going to provide for you later in this session, Jake is probably the person who's responding to this. He advises single subject, multiple subject programs. And so if you have a question, he's the person you really ask this question of.
Perfect. And as we said a few times, it's going to be really hard to go around to each program and each candidate and for us to give you sort of pre-approval on what might look like the right way to count, clinical practice hours for that individual. So of course, if you do feel like you have a critical question, please send it our way. But there really is going to be a reliance on you understanding, based on this guidance, what's going to be best for your candidates and implementing that and keeping track of it so that we understand, as we go on and as we're out of this, and also that we can help share best practices from you as we go through this now. So this last slide, it refers back to that guidance document again. There's a little bit of repetitiveness here. The special education, again, there's no specified minimums right now. And the goals are always, right, to ensure that students are getting high quality instruction, helping the candidates grow and develop, and also gathering data for your program improvement and candidate feedback throughout. And I think this part goes to Terry.
There have been some questions. Why doesn't the commission just waive some things? And what we really need programs to understand is the commission may amend or waive or change its program standards. We are preparing an agenda item for the April 23rd and 24th commission meeting that will allow the commission to modify its requirements, such as 6 observations per semester, 4 observations per quarter. That type of thing the commission can take action to waive or amend. There are other things that are requirements in Title V regulation or in the education code. And to have those things be waived or modified requires an executive order from the governor or that the legislature enact legislation. And so some of these things aren't as easy to modify. Next slide. The teaching performance assessment is actually a statutory requirement. It is in Ed Code, and so we are not able to waive this requirement. And actually, in many ways, we don't believe it's appropriate to waive this requirement. It is the assurance that the candidate is ready to be working on their own. What we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about the ability for the candidate to do this in their first year of practice. So this is what we're doing instead. Moving to the next slide. We just sent out yesterday information about the variable term waiver. We're going to take an agenda item forward in April with the names of all of the institutions that have requested a variable term waiver. The variable term waiver will let your candidates begin practice as educators of record. They will be able to get jobs as teachers. We're working with the districts so that they understand that these are people who are almost done with their preparation. Not only are they better than people on STIPs or PIPs, these are people that are virtually done with their variable term, with their preliminary preparation. They're just on a variable term waiver to either complete the TPA if they weren't able to complete it this spring, summer, complete some of the hours remaining if they didn't get sufficient, things like that. The next slide, there's a couple of situations where we do not need institutions to request a variable term waiver. One of those is for induction programs. Induction for both teachers and administrators. The reason they don't need a variable term waiver is those individuals are already authorized by their preliminary credential to have a job and do what they're doing. And most likely their credential is not expiring right away because it is a 5-year document. We are taking an agenda item forward to the commission in April that says, even though these are 2-year programs, please define that the 2019-20 year is a year. It was a full year. It was interrupted, but it was a year. Just like we're not going to have all the second graders go back and start second grade again in the fall. The second graders will start in 3rd grade. The other thing is that intern programs do not need to have a variable term waiver because they're going to be able to request a 1-year extension, and we're working with the powers that be to have that even be possible for someone if they've already had a 1-year extension. This extension is going to be an extension due to the COVID-19 health and safety restrictions. The next slide. This is a list of the credential areas that are most appropriate. And what we're thinking now is that most universities have moved their coursework online. And so we don't really think that necessarily candidates are going to have a lot of coursework left to do in the preliminary multiple and single subject. They're going to have possibly the TPA if they haven't done their videotaping already. There are options, though, to do the videotaping and to complete the TPA as they're doing technology-assisted teaching. In the PPS world, there are some requirements of specified hours. In the speech language pathology world, there are some specific requirements. So all of these programs are the ones that are most likely ones where the variable term waiver is going to be most helpful. That information went out yesterday in a PSDE news. Another PSDE news is going out today with additional guidance on the variable term waiver. And I'm going to turn that over to Amy to give you some more information.
Great, thank you, Terry. Next slide, please. So we just want to point out that for all accredited institutions offering commission-approved educator preparation programs, we are encouraging you all, we are strongly encouraging you to request the variable term waiver for your candidates. The request, we'll explain carefully to you how to send in this request, but we highly encourage you to request the waiver for all of your candidates who may not complete their preliminary or initial preparation this year. The request does not automatically place these candidates on a waiver, but will ensure that the waiver option is available to the institution. So what you're doing, your first step is to request the waiver from the commission at its April 23rd meeting. Next steps for commission-approved institutions. Next slide. Requests need to be received by April 10th. 2020, so that's coming up quickly. That is the preferred date. We will list in the posted item for consideration all of those of you who request by April 10th at the April Commission meeting, because we need to post our agenda 2 weeks in advance. Requests that come in between the 10th and the 20th, we will bring those forward as well, but they will be brought forward in an in-folder item. And here's really important information. We only need one request per institution. Next slide, please. Here is the email. So you are going to submit an email programs to vtw-covid@ctc.ca.gov, and you are going to use the text as provided here, exactly like this. You'll put your institution name in, and you will say that your institution is submitting a waiver request for candidates who have been impacted by the health and safety restrictions related to COVID-19 public health crisis and who were, 1, making appropriate progress toward completion of their program requirements, 2, on track to complete their preparation program by September 1st of 2020, and 3, they were unable to complete one or more of the following. So clinical practice hours, coursework required, examinations required, or a performance assessment. Next slide. So here's some guidance. If a teacher candidate is hired on a VTW, a variable term waiver, by a school district in 2020-21, because that's exactly what the VTW allows. It allows for employment. The teacher preparation program who submitted the waiver application to the commission and the candidate obtained the VTW, enabling them to secure a teaching position and enroll in a commission approved teacher induction program. So your teacher candidate will leave your program, they'll become employed, and they'll join an approved teacher induction program. Second point, teacher preparation programs will continue to support VTW teachers as they complete the TPA and any unfinished coursework, and recommend the VTW teacher for a preliminary teaching credential when they have completed all credential requirements. So you need to stay in an affiliation with your teacher candidates as they move into employment and begin induction. The induction programs are going to support the VTW teachers who need to complete supervised clinical practice during the first semester of teaching on the VTW, or as long as it takes during that induction program for them to complete their requirements. And then finally, for multiple subject and education specialist candidates, they're responsible for taking, still, and passing the Reading Instruction Competence Assessment, RICA, during the year of teaching on the variable term waiver. So go ahead, Tara, I'm going to turn it over to you for those candidates not hired.
Unfortunately, some of your candidates are not going to find a position in 2021. And Jake will get us to that slide in a moment. You may very well have already recommended that person for a variable term waiver, because you may have submitted your variable term waiver recommendations. Those are paper, and we'll give you more information on that in the future. You probably are going to do that in June or maybe July. The person is still looking for a job and the school year starts and they did not find a job. They still are going to need to complete all their requirements, which means they may need another placement. We're encouraging institutions to work with candidates. The state is looking into, is there any state funding to support this? As we know, with the COVID crisis, there's a lot of need in a lot of areas, but the commission and the higher education segments are advocating that some of the money be allocated for teacher candidates who do need to do additional coursework or time. The teacher preparation program would support their candidate in completion of the TPA and any remaining coursework, ensure that they've met the clinical practice requirements, and then help the candidate move towards RICA if they're a multiple subject and education specialist candidate. Once this is all done, then the candidate is recommended for the preliminary credential and they would continue looking for a position. We're hearing quite varied information across the state. There are places that are definitely hiring. There are some places that are in layoff mode. It's really going to be a local situation of what positions are available where in the state this coming fall, it seems. Next slide.
So this slide details some of the responsibilities of the preliminary program, as Amy was talking about, assuming that a candidate ends up in a job for next school year, but is still completing portions, so either the performance assessment or clinical practice hours for next year. these are the things that programs are expected to help with. So assisting candidates in developing that IDP that is used in the induction program, supporting them through their induction program to complete the coursework that they might still have to do for their preliminary program, and also to support them throughout the TPA. Connecting directly with the induction program leadership and induction mentors, and this is to help think about meeting up the goals of what they're working on for their ILP in induction, possibly with some of the things, some of the competencies left to be addressed in the preliminary, that there might be some crossover there. Monitoring the candidate progress and collaboration, and recommending the candidate for the preliminary once finished with all parts of the program. In addition, as far as finishing coursework, finding ways to possibly do it online or after school hours in a way that's conducive to a first-year full-time teacher being able to complete the courses from their preliminary program that they still needed to. Again, that IDP, the induction development plan, making sure that it reflects those supports that they may have needed from before. For the TPA, the candidates need to be supported in all aspects of taking it and submitting it. So the program needs to make sure to have a course or some sort of guidance structure for the candidate throughout the year as they submit that. Also, this next point about remediation. If they're not successful on their first try, what will be the policy set for helping them to remediate? Communication with the mentors in the induction program will be important. And again, tracking all parts of the program, including TPA, RECA, in order to recommend them for their preliminary credential. And I think this goes back to Terry.
Terry is happy to talk about it then. The induction programs are being notified about this. We're helping induction programs understand that yes, you may and should accept candidates who are teaching on a VTW. We're also helping induction programs understand that if there's normally an inquiry cycle that's done in the fall, not for a person on a VTW. The job of induction for someone on a VTW is for the mentor to meet regularly with that new teacher, support them in being effective, help them with their setting up their classroom, and also help them and support them in finishing their credential requirements. We're also making it clear to the induction programs that just because someone started on a variable term waiver, that does not mean their induction program is lengthened beyond the 2 years. Any candidate that works for the 2 years in induction and has made growth against the CSTP, they will have completed induction still within 2 years. So the individual learning plan for that first semester or that first year of the new teacher's work in induction is going to be focusing on finishing up those credential requirements instead of the regular routine activities of teacher induction. Going to the next slide. So what might this look like? And if I go past my slide and I'm not supposed to keep talking, just someone tell me. But this might look like the first semester of teaching looks a lot like what they might have missed in this spring. Their district-based mentor is helping that new teacher prepare. They're helping them with long-range planning. They're visiting them in their classroom. They're on hand after class. Also, there might be some time for online teacher training that we're going to put together here at the commission. So the mentors in the induction program will have the knowledge and skills and understand what it is that the candidate, the teacher on the variable term waiver is required to do. So that mentor will understand what they should do, what they shouldn't do. We still do expect that the preliminary program, as Jake already shared, is going to have some sort of online community or some sort of help for that candidate also in the work towards the TPA. If the TPA, the credential requirements, are completed in that first part of the semester of the year, then the candidate becomes a traditional induction candidate. If the candidate still needs to do some work towards their credential in the second semester of the year, that's fine. They continue working and they get those credential requirements completed. Go ahead and remember to keep adding your questions
All right.
into, we'll keep answering them.
Yep, and I'll talk about what the commission's going to do next. Next slide, please. So what the commission is going to do to support all of you during this very challenging time could look potentially like any or all of these things, and probably even a lot more than what we have on this slide, but let's go through this. So the commission will inform the educator preparation community about the variable term waiver process, and we've done that. The guidance is posted on the commission's website. We will also inform the TK-12 employer community about the variable term waiver process. And we'll work with all of our communities out there like AXA and CSESA, with the Department of Education. Everyone that will talk to us, we will provide them with information about the variable term waiver. We will also determine the need for and possibly develop a sample memorandum of understanding that can be used between the EPP, the Educator Preparation Program, and the school district. The MOU between teacher preparation programs and districts, this is the same concept. We will also work with the induction community very closely to define supervisory supports for teacher candidates completing requirements while they are employed and enrolled in an induction program. So this is really, wonderful that we have a two-tiered system in California, because induction is posed and ready to support these candidates and to pick them up where they are and help them grow and develop professionally and complete their performance assessment if that's what they need to do. Finally, the commission will provide that training to the induction community, so that is a responsibility we will take on, and we will also do all we can to advocate for funding support with the state as necessary to minimize impacts on candidates and preparation programs. So we're here to support you, and we're doing all we can. So now we're going to pause for a second and take a few of the questions. There's lots of questions that have come in on the chat. We may not be able to answer all of them in this session, but we are going to keep the chat and we will be providing answers. So let's go ahead and take a couple of questions. I think Terry and Jake, you were going to kind of monitor and pull a few out for us.
Yes, we have one that says, can an intern, an education specialist who finished all program requirements except RECA, go on a variable term waiver instead of staying on a third year on their intern credential? The answer there is no. The intern needs to have an intern extension for their credential. They are still going to need support and supervision, and hopefully they will be able to then pass RECA. Jake, do you have another question?
Well, I've seen this a few times. Can serving as a substitute for master teacher or other teacher on site, I'm assuming by on site you mean possibly online, can that count as solo teaching this year for the 4 weeks?
And I think what we would say to that is, serving as a substitute is good teaching practice often. Remember that the newest requirements from the commission require that an experienced teacher is involved. So if an experienced teacher, maybe their master teacher or a programmatic supervisor, helps them, reflects on with them what they've done in their day as a substitute, helps them think how they might do something differently in the future, then yes, it could count as time. It's not just the number of hours teaching in front of students, it's teaching students and working with an experienced mentor so that the candidate is growing.
Yeah, and I would say probably best practices on the substituting would be, because often for that solo portion, the expectation is that these are students and a class that you've had some time to understand, so that you've done some of the planning as well as the delivering of the instruction. I realize this may be more difficult in the current situation, but that's one of the reasons that sometimes substituting is not necessarily seen as appropriate, is that it may just be sporadic lessons without sort of that full understanding of the class. And so if there's any, work that candidate can do to understand the students that are in that course, to make it more like make it feel more like that, that culminating experience for the 4 weeks, I think the better.
There's an important question I think I'd like to address before we go on. Will all of the teacher candidates in our program be required to obtain the waiver? Absolutely not. Any candidate who has passed the TPA and met whatever flexibility requirements are in place after the April commission meeting should be recommended for their preliminary teaching credential. We've got a number of items in the April commission meeting that we're asking the commission to consider, such as if they've passed the TPA, maybe the 600 hours is not important in this year's candidates. That the six observations may not be important if they've passed the TPA. The TPA, though, is a hard yes/no decision. They have to have passed the TPA to be eligible for the preliminary. So really, we look at this as a candidate by candidate decision, really thinking, where are they with their TPA? What have they been able to do? So please look at this candidate by candidate.
I want to say something about these last two. Let me go to the last one first from Rick Barsh about asynchronous teaching. So there's two issues there. For clinical practice, asynchronous teaching can definitely count towards the larger amount of hours. I think you need to think specifically if you're going to have it towards the 4 weeks. That's going to be trickier, but finding a justification that might work for your program could work. And you say audio, audio, I think that goes towards the solo or any of the, clinical practice. On the TPA side, as we'll talk about in a bit, it's going to be a decision between the program and the candidate as to whether they can meet the same expectations that are required as usual for the TPA. So having that be audio only or be asynchronous is unlikely going to be able to do that in this stage. And so the candidate may be better off waiting, doing that variable term waiver and doing it next year, hopefully with a classroom of students. The other question was about what documentation for reflection. There doesn't need to be much documentation for this. This is in any way that a program would maintain an hour's log for candidates that are doing their general large amount of clinical practice hours. You may have hours in there that show you reflecting, but that's between them and their master teacher or the experienced educator. It doesn't need to be very specific.
All right, well, we thank all of you for your questions. Please continue to put them in the chat and we will continue on. We still have a lot to cover and we want to make sure we can fit it all in our time with you today. So I'm going to turn it back to Nicole, I believe.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. This webinar has been such a joint effort, so I really appreciate all the communication from the Commission. The questions that we have gotten vary, of course, some from policy, clinical practice, and edTPA. So we've tried to really split that up. I know there are some questions coming in the chat for edTPA, so we'll begin to take those now. I do want to say that we've gotten a lot of questions just asking general things such as, can we eliminate task 2, for example? Can we just not submit a video because of the current situation? And I just want to say that from what we're going to talk about right now, all decisions about the assessment really need to, maintain that reliability and validity. So any decisions of just changing the assessment drastically cannot be made suddenly and without some trial. And we just understanding that we just don't have that time right now. And so we are grateful that states have put out, such clear policy around what perhaps the extensions, in this case, the variable term waiver and other options that are available. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we have been able to do that, again, really allow us to be flexible, but also really meeting that reliability and validity point that we need to stick to. So the next slide just outlines the 3 things that we are going to address. One is extended registrations. additional scoring windows. And then in response to a lot of inquiries about an alternative arrangement, and some of you are aware that edTPA has always had an alternative arrangement policy and process. And one of those alternative arrangements is for a virtual learning environment. So there have been a number of questions about that, and in response to that, we've put in some guidance because of the volume of questions. Now, again, I want to be clear that this alternative is not a response to the pandemic. It's something that has always been in place, and with that, you'll see that the guidance is very clear that candidates do need to be prepared and able to meet these requirements for the VLE, the virtual learning environment, and those decisions to do that need to be made jointly among the program, the candidate, and the P12 partner. So we'll go through some of that, but I just want to be clear about the guidance and the alternative arrangement that was there in place, and we've provided some additional considerations on how to do that. So on the next slide, we have the extended registration. So, and I'm gonna also ask my colleagues to jump in anytime if I'm missing something or need correcting. On April 6th, all registrations will be extended to the December 5th, 2021 deadline. So that will be automatic. So all candidates who are registered by that time will extend to that date. There's no need to apply, which was some of the original thinking that was sent out, but we've decided to go ahead and extend those. The next slide. The additional scoring windows are also on board, and so you can find all this information on edtpa.com, but you'll see that we've provided and added some of those dates there down below. And next slide. And then the virtual learning environment, again, we know that some schools are using this virtual learning environment, and we understand that varies. From my own experience, it varies by school and what the school and the students are able to do. And so again, what we have emphasized in this virtual learning environment alternative is that programs, candidates, and in collaboration with the P12 should really determine if this is a viable option for both candidates and learners. And also we are asking that programs should be prepared to offer support to candidates while they're in this option. It's again, a decision that should be made jointly and should not be taken lightly on whether or not this is a viable option for them. And next slide. We have, again, with all alternative arrangements, the candidate must meet the edTPA handbook and rubric requirements for that. And so the link is here. We're gonna go over the guidance that we've provided, but just wanted to, again, show that all of the requirements that are in the handbook will need to be met by the candidate, and we've outlined, again, those alternative evidence forms that could be allowed. And then next slide. We also have some additional considerations for content areas. I'm gonna actually ask my colleague, Kendall, to jump in and talk to this slide.
Okay, we've been learning a lot about online instruction, and the various platforms that are available. There are some fields that we're still concerned about. What we're doing is we're reaching out to experts in the field and trying to figure out what alternatives would be. And so this is the list of the fields that we've identified. So for PE, group activities like gameplay are probably impossible to duplicate online. Individual psychomotor skill development and cognitive skills related to psychomotor skills seems doable online. We're looking for suggestions for how the use of rules, routines, and procedures to manage activities, it's rubric 6 and task 2, might be duplicated in a virtual environment. The next one is early childhood and also very young elementary students like kindergartners. It's a challenge to keep young children engaged and responsive in virtual learning environments and managing active learning online. So if you have any suggestions for strategies, we would love to share them with everybody. Visual arts, lessons on understanding art concepts or artistic genres, responding to art, critiquing art should fit virtual learning environments. Lessons on creating art will be dependent upon materials that are readily available in homes. Nobody's going to have a pottery kiln or, you know, a lot of the paints and stuff that is used in visual arts classes. Performing arts is similar to visual arts in that lessons on concepts and responding to critiquing performances and genres should fit in a virtual learning environment. Band, orchestra, choral groups, group dance performance, theater pieces other than monologues are going to be, I don't know, difficult if not impossible to do online, but individual performance seems amenable to the virtual learning environment. In agriculture, anything involving hands-on like floral arrangements or equipment, agriculture mechanics, biology, botany, lab work is going to be hard to duplicate, but there are a lot of topics in agriculture that be amenable to online virtual learning environments. So depending on what class they're teaching, they might need to have to be creative, but it should work. Science laboratory work is going to be probably impossible to do online because it requires equipment or materials. Students need to be able to collect and analyze data about a scientific phenomenon and construct explanations of it. So online data sets where students can select variables to analyze will be okay. Online maps for geology. We've had candidates do thought experiments. So in physics, one candidate had them think about you're on a raft floating down a river, you're dropping a ball, and what does the motion of the ball look like from your perspective, a person on the raft and a person on the riverbank? And then they analyze that to learn about different perspectives of motion. There's virtual phenomena that are available online. I've seen some in nuclear physics where they do something with some virtual things and collect data from that. I've seen online investigations comparing big structures of birds with food sources where candidates can use that as an investigation. Your science students are going to have to be creative, particularly in chemistry and physics courses, or select, it'll be restricted to the topics that they can do. If you identify instructional strategies for early childhood active learning or online resources for like science and the others, please send them to Nicole and we'll distribute them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kendall. And again, I'll just wrap up this slide just by saying we're going to go through some of that guidance. And again, these are additional considerations that we're thinking just because, again, our folks that that we rely on, that we've always relied on for many, many years, help us prepare this guidance. And so, again, please send that. There's I'll say again, this is, any decisions that come out from edTPA, please know that this is, if they come out even through edtpa.com, this is with our involvement. And so any decisions are joint from Stanford and put out, through our channels. So please don't hesitate to contact us if there are any questions as well. So the next slide. Great, I'm gonna just talk a little bit about what we have in some of the guidance before we go too detailed in it. Task 2 does require synchronous instruction. And again, this is part of that initial conversation about how the handbook was designed and developed, and really that back and forth. And that might happen, again, through a clear video, such as we're doing now, and that interaction. But again, this is where time and place is important, that it's happening at the same time to do that. And that is still a requirement for task 2. The next slide acknowledges that for task 3, No, thank you. The task 3 and 4 allow for this asynchronous instruction. So this is not necessarily confined to the same time and place, but you'll see that the teacher might put something out, an assessment, and then send it back. This happens already. This is how many classrooms are operating, you know, on Google Classroom or other things that they're using. And so this isn't anything different that we might see. But again, we'll see in the guidance that it says this may not impact anything that the candidate's doing. And for we've gotten some questions just thinking about task 4. My candidates have already done task 1, 2, and 3, and they just need to do task 4. Joining to submit this. If it's not, you know, again, anything different than they would be doing, then really this is all the same, and they can submit it together. But we'll go through each task separately. So I'm gonna turn it over to I believe Kelly will take it from here on the next slide.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, Nicole. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Great, thank you. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Kelly Crawford, and I work with the Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon. And as Nicole mentioned, I just want to walk through with you those specific guidelines that were released out to the field last week. I have been also watching the chat and think there are a few questions in there regarding evidence that we'll be able to cover during these next couple of slides. As Nicole has mentioned, you know, candidates and programs, and it's really first determined if that online, whatever virtual learning platform they're able to use, is going to allow them to record the instruction and collect those other artifacts that are of course required. We just want to remind you, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide, that all of these requirements and specifications, if you are a visual learner like myself and want to have a nice clear table to review these requirements with your candidates, just a reminder that these are all found in the back of every single handbook. This is just an example of the elementary literacy with task 4. Instruction task 2, where it does go through for each part that must be submitted, the supported file types, the number of files, the response length, and then any additional information that candidates need to keep in mind. So just a reminder there. Please forward to the next one. So we're going to go ahead and go through these reminders. The requirements and considerations that we've include, again, are available to all candidates who are in a virtual learning environment that can allow for video recording and synchronous instruction, in addition to asynchronous for some evidence for tasks 3 and 4. But we just have to keep in mind that they still must meet all technical specifications in the handbook. Let's go ahead to the next one, please. So let's talk about task 1 first. Task 1, because, you know, task 1 evidence that they are submitting is the candidate's planning and doesn't necessarily require any evidence of actual interaction or teaching with the students, that there really are no changes, you know, to materials for this submission. All materials can be provided through those various file types you'll find in the evidence chart, even if they are, of course, being delivered or prepared in a virtual learning environment. I do want to just note here, though, the first line beside requirements and considerations is that, you know, we certainly understand that 3 weeks ago, candidates may have completed their planning for this learning segment, and now a week or 2 or 3 weeks later, when they have the opportunity to reconnect with their students virtually and are able to teach it, that of course things may need to change because of the new environment they find themselves in. So I just want to note here that in that case where they are still teaching that same learning segment, the central focus, the state standards, and the learning objectives that are the focus, there is no need for them to go back and rewrite task 1. You'll see in just a moment that we encourage candidates to mention in their commentaries for task 2 and 3 any changes that they had made, you know, based now on the current situation we all find ourselves in. I will just, you know, note that the only reason why a candidate would need to go back and start over or really go back and change their task 1 is if they find that now once they are able to complete the portfolio, they are now working with either a new group of students, based on a switch in placement, or they are now focusing on a different learning segment. Just please keep in mind that, scorers, when scorers are looking at edTPA, they are of course looking for that integration across all 3 tasks and looking for that consistent learning segment and central focus. Okay, thank you. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. So task 2 is where we really need to get into some more details around these videos. As Nicole mentioned, again, technical specifications and requirements have not changed for task 2. So just a few requirements and considerations for you and your candidates as you move forward. The first there, and I did see some of this conversation going on in the chat, but just a reminder that the candidate will continue to need to confirm those attestations that they have the proper permission forms in place. We at Pearson and Scale, again, believe that this is really falls back into you as the program, determining whether or not your current permission forms are permissible or if there needs to be any modification. I can just say that on our end as receiving these portfolios, nothing has changed or will change about how we receive those, how we keep those secure, and protect the confidentiality of those students and teachers in the artifacts in the videos. So again, they just will need to continue to attest that they have those in place. In the second bullet, you will see that what I mentioned just before, that it encourages the candidates that if they have had to make some modifications and changing to their initial planning based now on their new learning environment, then they can offer those reflections in the instruction task 2 commentary. And the last bullet there is alternative evidence submitted in lieu of a standard video must still demonstrate each of those required elements measured within task 2. And you'll notice that we included a little note there, and just that when we were having these discussions and really looking at every single element and artifact of the portfolio, we came back to, that standard video, the initial requirement of edTPA is to have a video that shows that interaction, that face-to-face meeting and interaction, teaching and learning between a student and teacher. So that still needs to take place in these videos. The videos need to capture those interactions now in this virtual environment. So we can go ahead to the next screen, please. I think there's one more requirement and consideration before we move on. Going back again to setting some minimums, and I did see this question in the chat, is that as you all I know are very, very familiar with the handbook requirements, most handbooks, there are a few exceptions of course, do require that the teacher have a class or a group within a class that is comprised of no less than 4 students. So again, that requirement is still in place. The video clip must include, at least if nothing but for a few moments, a video of both the teacher in which they are identifiable in case question of who submitted this portfolio were ever to be raised, but also to be able to see that in the score, really to be able to verify that this is in fact an authentic capture or authentic evidence of the teacher working with their P12 students. I just want to say one thing there about the asterisks around emojis, avatars, and thumbnails. We've talked about this a lot over the last week as we've shared this information with states. And we were having a little brainstorming session with one of the states yesterday, actually. And, we're saying oftentimes, even in this Zoom meeting that we're in now, I can see some cameras. I could see Nicole. I could see Terry earlier. But as soon as they turn their cameras off, then we see their name, or in other platforms, we may see an avatar or their picture. So, programs were just, again, kind of brainstorming and throwing out ideas. And they said, even if the teacher, for just at the beginning of the lesson, person would say, "Hey, Nicole, yeah, I'm going to do like a roll call," or "Nicole, turn on your video and smile for us or wave to us." Again, just briefly enough that that scorer can verify that this is an authentic interaction between teachers and students. And you also note there at the bottom, if there is any difficulty, I mean, you know, goodness, everybody knows, I'm sure we've all had oops moments and things aren't working this week, as we're really getting kind of baptism by fire with doing virtual interactions ourselves. You know, if a student's camera doesn't work, or, you know, something malfunctions that prevents them from really capturing what they need to capture, then they should include that in a note, you know, again, so that the scorer doesn't issue a condition code in lieu of a score. So we'll go ahead, please, to the next screen. We're still in task 2. Just one other thing I wanted you to think about, or we wanted you to think about, is that, you know, in this virtual platform, remember, for most of the handbooks, candidates, well, in all of the handbooks, candidates can submit up to 2 videos. And so, you know, keeping in mind again that at least one of the 2 clips needs to show that teacher, candidate, and the students. But in the other clips, certainly you can think about, or the candidates could think about, other interactions and synchronous instruction that they could show evidence of within the tool. So if they are sharing a whiteboard, you know, as they're doing instruction, if they have, you know, chats going on, if they're providing demonstrations, or maybe modeling that essential literacy strategy and not necessarily being seen at the moment, but using the platform to do that, then that would certainly be acceptable as well. You can go to the next one, please. So the next slide is going to cover some, is going to cover some additional evidence or acceptable evidence for task 2. A lot of times, you know, and like the meeting here today, of course, we can see the chat as it is going on, but we cannot, whenever we pull this recording, the chat won't be included. So if candidates are able to download, you know, in separate files, chat dialogue, email communications, or any of those instant messaging, if they're not able to upload that as one of the video clips, then they may also upload it and attach it. And I apologize, if we could go on to the next slide. I think it's on the next one. They are able to attach this to the end of their task 2 part B instruction commentary. So again, they could certainly capture all of that live interaction that's going on in the screen, but anything else that's not shown in that recording or screen capture, they could download that and copy and paste that to the end of their instruction commentary, and then refer to that as additional evidence in that commentary, in their commentary prompt responses. Let's see here. Okay, we could go ahead and go to the next one, please. And then we will certainly pause and take any additional questions that you have about these guidelines. So in task 3, the first note you see here is that, again, if the candidate has had to make some modifications from the time they planned back in task 1 to now delivering the assessment, then they can explain that in the commentary. Just as in task 2, candidates will still need to meet the minimum number of students involved in that, you know, whole class or group assessment to include in the whole class analysis that's required. We want candidates to consider, as they think about an assessment that they're going to use in a virtual learning environment, we want them to consider, you know, what within the virtual learning environment will allow them to deliver and to collect. They want to be sure that, of course, that they can analyze that, but also capture the feedback through that virtual platform. And we will talk about some potential evidences for feedback on the next couple of slides. So we can go ahead to the next one, please. Again, just a note here that, of course, if they planned several weeks ago and they had a class of, you know, 15, and now 3 weeks later they are able to interact and to assess a group of 4 or 5 students, that's okay. Again, our scorers will understand the situation, and candidates will just need to be need to make sure they make note of that in their commentary. But they still just need to make sure that they are providing evidence for each of those rubrics. Rubrics 11, 12, 13, and 14, as you know, require those student work samples, that evidence of feedback, and that evidence of academic language use. And so they, again, just need to ensure that those pieces they're selecting are providing evidence for all of those elements of task 3. Let's go on to the next one, please. So acceptable evidence. There are no changes to the materials for submission. All of those materials can be provided through the various file types, even if delivered through the virtual learning environment. And we can go on to the next one. This is just going to, again, reiterate that there may be many tools. Thank you. That there may be some tools within the virtual learning environment that they can utilize as evidence for task 3. So for instance, if they are providing feedback to the student through the virtual learning environment and in a synchronous setting, then they could certainly audio record that, or they could video record that. So just as before, audio and video clips have always been an option for task 3, and of course continue to do so. They could also, though, record, live interaction and feedback through other means within the virtual learning environment, like the chat dialogue or email communications. If they are working on, a shared document together. So all of those things, could be used for evidence successfully within that virtual learning environment. We can go on to the next one, please. Like this just again says, screenshots, anything though, handwritten, verbal, or audio, anything that could be captured here in the virtual learning environment could certainly still be used just as before for, particularly for Part B evidence of feedback. For task 4, there are no changes, again, to materials for submission, but really this kind of falls in line the same with task 3. If we think about, the feedback that they're giving students on the assessment, if they're doing that verbally or if they're doing that verbally through the system, they could collect that through a video clip or an audio clip, or of course they could collect it or in any of the aforementioned tools, that they may have available through that virtual learning platform. Okay, so I'm going to pause for just a second. I know that was a lot to walk through. Nicole, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to watch the chat, if there's anything that we could address at this point regarding these guidelines.
Thanks, Kelly. We've been working hard on that chat, so I think we are okay for that. I'm going to ask Lori to just continue so we can make sure to get to the next section as well. But we'll stop at the end of the edTPA stuff one more time.
Great,
Thank
you,
you,
Nicole. So I'll be very quick. I'm recognizing that we're close on time, so we'll be very quick. We are asking candidates to complete and have their edTPA coordinator, or if they're unaffiliated, their building level administrator, submit a request form. And the reason for that is that Scale and Pearson have together agreed that all portfolios that are completed within a virtual learning environment will be double scored. So there'll be 2 sets of eyes on those. And the way that we need to ensure that they are double scored is by tagging them as they come into the submission system. So the request form was emailed out through AACTE to all edTPA coordinators. It's also available at edtpa.com. The teacher candidate, in collaboration with their edTPA coordinator, must complete the form. It's electronic, so everyone can fill it out and email it back and forth to each other. We're asking the edTPA coordinator to really review that and again ensure that the environment is both appropriate for all learners, for the P12 learners as well as the teacher candidate, and that the environment will also provide a viable environment for candidates to capture the artifacts and evidence that they will need to be scored using the rubrics. Once the coordinator and the candidate have collaborated with the P12 partner and they agree that this is an appropriate step, the form can be filled out and the coordinator can email that form. And next slide, please. I'll show you that email address. Oh, it must be coming soon. So I apologize. This is just a little bit about the form. You can see it's completely fillable. It's a fillable PDF. Candidates can fill it right in. The only thing they may not know on here is the NCN. That's a customer ID number that's provided at the time of registration. So once they register, they can get right into their Pearson account and they can find that number in the candidate status reports that are updated every morning. The person who can get into Ed Reports at your institution can also get that NCN number as well. A specialty area would be something like biology or chemistry within the sciences. If they're using the Performing Arts Handbook, they would indicate if they were music or dance. So that specialty area, most candidates will know that if it applies to them. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide, questions 3 and 4 are really the critical questions on here. And I will share with all of you that this form, in response to early feedback this week, we have combined these 2 questions and there's a new form that's now available at edTPA.com. If you submit one using this form, it's no big deal. We will pick it up. Our team will pick it up and review it just the same. But it does ask the candidate and the edTPA coordinator to certify by signing this form that the virtual platform does allow them to capture video of themselves and their students. And again, keeping in mind what we've shared today, that that video does need to be synchronous. The final 2 parts to this form, and you can advance for me. Thank you. The candidate and the coordinator will attest that they are the people that are signing the form and that they understand that the candidate will be completing in a VLE. Next slide, please. Thank you. Unaffiliated candidates, I think I mentioned this. Instead of the EPP, it will be their school district or name, and the building level administrator would take the place of the edTPA coordinator. Next slide. Once that form is completed, here's the email address. Once the form is completed, we're asking the edTPA coordinator or building administrator to email that to edTPA EPP support@pearson.com. And the reason for that is simply that because it's an electronic form, we have no other way of knowing that the edTPA coordinator or building level administrator has seen and completed that form. Once it has been submitted, we will reply and just confirm receipt of that submission within 1 business day. And then the next slide, please. You'll see that we will provide notification of approval or denial within 2 business days. One question that we've often been asked is, why would we deny that? Why would the request be denied? And that's, again, if a candidate is completing a full task, a full edTPA, or if they're completing a task 2 retake and they need video, if they indicate that their system is unable to capture video or that it is unable to capture synchronous instruction, that would be the reason for the denial. I think, next slide, yep, I think I'll turn it back over to Nicole.
Great. So I know we have a few more questions in the chat, so we'll finish up those by chat. I think we got pretty much most of them, so we don't have to just stop now. What you see on this slide, again, our email addresses. The first 2 are specific to California, so those go to the CTC. General questions, COVID-19 specific related questions for policy. edTPA general questions, urgent questions, you all have my email anyway. Some of you have my cell phone. You can always contact me, don't worry. But I also have the Stanford Scale email there as well. So great. And so we'll move on to some additional guidance. I know we're have about 17 minutes left.
Okay, so this is Terry Clark again, and We do want you to know that our intent at the commission is to work with all educator preparation programs to do whatever is legally, practically, and programmatically feasible to help those candidates complete their program this year if possible. It's only the candidates who cannot meet their requirements who would need the variable term waiver. And this is kind of the perfect time for me to introduce Mary Vixie Sandy, the executive director of the commission, who's joined us. Mary, would you like to say a couple things in our last 17 minutes?
Maybe for 30 seconds. I just, greetings everyone. I hope you're well and finding some pleasure in the shelter in place moment that we find ourselves in. I don't know about you, but we are all, everyone I know seems to be working twice as hard as they were before we came home to do the work. So I appreciate that we're all here together on this Zoom chat and discussion of how we're going to help our candidates get through these waters and get fully credentialed and into the classrooms in the fall. So we have been, in our work at the commission, we really are scrubbing every idea we can come up with or hear about regarding flexibility, how we can be flexible in and yet still hit the goal, which is that candidates have the preparation they need to begin their work. So I don't have much to add. Happy to answer any questions that the rest of the team can't answer, which I don't think there are any, but you know, go ahead. There's a throwdown challenge for y'all, and thanks for being here.
So Amy, go ahead. You have the next slide, I think.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mary, for joining us, and thank you, Terry. So let's keep going here with some sort of high-level general guidance for teaching performance assessment. So the commission, as Mary said, is working with the administration, the legislature, stakeholders, districts, and programs to truly understand and attempt to minimize, to the extent possible, the cost impacts for candidates, districts, and educator preparation programs. We do know that supporting candidates has a fee associated with it, and we are working hard to figure out how to provide some potential extra support. So the document provides guidance to sponsors of educator preparation programs regarding the teaching performance assessment requirements. So this guidance document is already posted on the commission website. That's what that bullet's referring to. So let's go to the next slide. All right, for guidance for teaching for up-to-date information, again, just go to our website. We also, as we said earlier in the presentation, encourage you to join PSD News because every Friday we send out up-to-date information about all that we're doing at the commission and the PSD unit and in performance assessment work. And even during this COVID-19 time, extra PSD News blurbs are coming out from the PSD unit. So please sign up if you haven't. And then finally, we do want to touch for a moment on the fact that testing centers are closed and other, so we know you may have some questions about testing, the exams that California requires. So please go to our California Educator Credentialing Assessment website and find information about all of our other exams, CBEST, CSET, RECA, CTEL, CPACE, etc. And with that, we have some scenarios to share. We have one more slide. So for EPPs operating under a developmental sequence of learning to teach, we understand that a large portion of that clinical work could be happening. And because our schools in the state have closed, many through April, and this, you can tell already how dated this slide is because now we've had guidance as late as yesterday afternoon about potentially staying closed for the rest of the spring. And that there are some indications we thought several days ago and now had an indication yesterday from our state superintendent that in fact we may not reopen schools till this fall, this summer maybe in some places. If schools do not reopen, it may be difficult for candidates to complete their clinical practice as planned or develop and submit their TPAs we've been talking with you about, and that's why we're offering the variable term waiver. So please remember to put your questions in the chat as you have done such a great job doing, and continue to reach out to us and ask questions so that we can be here to support you. We have two common scenarios that we think candidates are facing. We'd like to kind of run through those quickly with you. before our time is up. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back.
Yeah, this one's me, Amy. So the first scenario is candidates who are able to finish their coursework, clinical practice, and the TPA by the end of this spring or summer 2020 term. And given the current circumstances, it may be possible with modification. So it could be that courses have been completed for the most part at this point, or it could be that courses are being, modified in a way so that candidates can finish now. The way that you embed demonstrations of understanding and being able to demonstrate competency on the TPEs is a preparation program decision. And again, having a record of sort of how you've made those modifications and having that available for the commission come your year of program review and moving into your site visit will be important to have. As it says here, the guiding principle should be whether candidates are ready to demonstrate that they have the TPE skills. And each program should make that determination by candidate. There may be candidates who have similar experiences, but you think one does need to get to that 600 hours, while another one has gotten close to that, but you believe that candidate is ready to recommend based on the experiences they have and their ability to meet the TPEs. So other ways that the instructional skills can be demonstrated, and these also are not all new. A lot of these were included in the clinical practice guidance from before, but things such as showing a lesson or unit plan rather than teaching the unit, sharing that plan with an experienced educator and reflecting on that with them can count towards some of those clinical practice hours. Get to the next slide. Also, analysis of student work that may not be from a candidate's actual classroom because of these circumstances. It may be that you're working with an experienced educator on other student work that's out there, but it does give that candidate an experience and the ability to work with another experience. Reflections on prior teaching that were happening before this situation occurred. And as it says here, there's an expectation that programs will be asked to provide a summary, no more than 5 pages, and this would come around during that program review year for your institution to explain the modifications you made as you worked through this situation. So as we've talked about with the TPA, it's going to be really helpful to make sure that your program has the ability to offer the variable term waivers, because it may be determined that by the program and the candidate that there's not a way for them to complete this now, either because there's not synchronous teaching happening for task 2, as we talked about earlier. And so for each candidate, it should be determined for that particular candidate, are they in a place where they're ready to submit that TPA, or would it be fair to them to have them take another year beyond that waiver and complete it when they're back in a classroom? And more guidance is coming, but it's already there, as Amy has talked about and as we're talking through now. Let's see, is this still me? Yes, scenario 2. So candidate is able to finish coursework, but unable to complete either clinical practice or the TPA by the end of spring or summer. As we've talked about with the variable term waiver, again, we understand that it's likely this could happen for many candidates. It's important to work with each one and to ensure that they have this waiver and are able to complete those if they need to over the next year.
Okay, so we have a couple of specific questions, frequently asked questions that have been coming in, so we've put some responses together. So the first question is, will candidates still be required to complete a TPA? And the answer is yes. Completion of a TPA is required by law for all multiple subject and single subject teacher candidates before they can be recommended for the credential. So at this time on this day, do realize it is in law. So next question. Our second question is about what a program's responsibility is to candidates who are completing their TPA while employed on a variable term waiver. So again, remember, candidates must be affiliated with a commission-approved program to be eligible to complete an approved TPA. So early in the chat, there was a question about affiliated. We're using this word because what this means is, yes, affiliation. They don't have to be enrolled in a class per se. Every program may determine a different way to stay affiliated. That's up to the program. You might do it through a letter of agreement. You might do it through an MOU. You might offer a 1-credit extension class. You might ask them to re-enroll. It all depends on the context of your program and how you want to handle that. But you need to know what your teacher candidates are when they're on their variable term waiver, and they need to be in affiliation with you as a teacher preparation program. So the next question, due to school closures, can candidates change teaching venues and complete the requirements in an online setting? Yes, and you've heard a lot about that already from your edTPA folks, so we'll just continue with that. Question 4, what are the Commission's expectations for online teaching? All TPA submissions must meet the requirements specified in the assessment guides provided. And again, edTPA went through this very carefully with you. Programs must work with the candidates to determine whether an online setting is suitable. So we don't want candidates by themselves making this determination. We want you engaged with them. There is a key issue about whether the candidate can obtain sufficient video evidence. As you know, in your request form, they would have to say yes to that. And the second issue would be that the candidate can adequately be supported and supervised by the program. So it's still a joint effort between the program and the candidate when they are on the variable term waiver. Next question. Due to disruptions, will the additional dates for submission of materials be added? And yes, Pearson is the technical contractor. Nicole's going to jump in here.
I know this slide didn't get changed. So we also provided those dates above. So you all have that link there. We'll change this later.
Yeah, great. And then we have one last question. I think, Jake, you get the last question, and we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, and this question is very specific to edTPA too, about whether or not there will be significant delays. Right now, it's similar processing time, but as other dates come available, they'll be on edTPA.com.
So that brings us to the end, and I think, Nicole, we'll turn it back to you if you want to just take any last questions.
Oh, great. I think we're doing pretty good. And if people have additional questions, they can post them very quickly. You know, again, I just want to thank you all for your patience. We worked together, all of us that are on this webinar, to make things happen. So, you know, as I said, we check the handbook. A lot of handbooks have very specific guidance. Also check some of the other support documents that we referenced today. Again, the changes, the state, thank you, has been very clear about where they stand, which is very helpful for us on the edTPA side to respond to questions. So I think that's it. I'll turn it back to you, Amy, and just before I do that, just again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the time. Stay safe, and I appreciate you all being here today.
Well, we would like to offer the same support to all of you, and we're here to help. Just stay in touch with us, stay in touch with Nicole. And Mary, would you like to say any last words of wisdom from you today?
I think I spent my wisdom already, so
okay.
Thank you.
Mary, you want to say?
This is Terry. I'll finalize. Remember, tpa@ctc.ca.gov. That's not for edTPA questions. That's for general questions about commission requirements. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.